Good morning and welcome to World News here on TVP World. My name is Diana Skaya. On Monday night, while addressing the UN Security Council, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski said that the road to peace in Ukraine remains the same. That is, Russia must withdraw its forces from Ukrainian territory. Now, on top of that, Poland's chief diplomat reaffirmed European support for a just and lasting peace in the war-torn country.
The right way forward remains. Russia should immediately, completely, and unconditionally withdraw all its forces from Ukraine's territory. We as Europeans will continue to stand side by side with Ukraine to achieve a just and lasting peace. Peace through strength, the only kind Kremlin respects. Finally, I'd like to dedicate to this Council a maxim authored by my predecessor as Foreign Minister of Poland, a survivor of Auschwitz and of Stalinist prisons, Professor Władysław Bartoszewski. When you are in doubt how to behave, behave with decency. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Tuesday night, the United Nations General Assembly backed a resolution condemning Russia on the third-year mark of its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now, the document, drafted by Ukraine and the European Union, garnered 93 votes in favor and 18 against. The countries opposing the resolution included Russia, North Korea, and notably the United States. At the same meeting, the UN Security Council approved an American version of the motion. Now, the resolution presented to the General Assembly labeled Russia an aggressor state and called on the Kremlin to withdraw its troops from Ukraine. While the EU resolution was adopted, the vote was not without controversy. Among the 18 countries that voted against it were the United States, Russia, Belarus, and North Korea. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council adopted a Washington-drafted resolution on the war in Ukraine. At just 3 paragraphs, the U.S. document notably avoided labeling Russia as an aggressor. Instead, it implored a swift end to the conflict and further urged a lasting peace between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. 2 people were killed and 6 more wounded after an overnight Russian strike on the Sumy region of Ukraine. At least 169 explosions were recorded by local authorities, and neighboring countries, including Poland, scrambled their fighters. Moscow also launched an attack on Kyiv, wounding 1 person. Now, in the strikes, the Russian army used drones, mortars, and heavy artillery. In Sumy, 2 drones killed 1 person and damaged 2 apartment buildings. Meanwhile, the town of Miropilia was attacked with drones and guided aerial bombs, wounding 3 civilians and damaging 6 houses. At the same time, Moscow attacked the Ukrainian capital, wounding a woman and partially destroying a house, along with some neighboring buildings. Responding to the overnight strikes, Warsaw scrambled its jets and brought its air defense systems on high alert. U.S. President Donald Trump has claimed that Russian leader Vladimir Putin accepts the idea of European peacekeepers in Ukraine as part of a possible peace deal. Now, his remarks came during an official visit of French President Emmanuel Macron to the White House. However, Trump avoided commenting on whether Ukraine could regain its occupied territories.
The European troops may go into Ukraine as peacemakers. So when the agreement is done, they can watch that everything's followed properly. I don't think that's going to be a problem. And a lot of the European countries, I don't want to speak for France, but I know that the president's talked about doing that also. I think that'll be a very good day when we can go in as peacekeepers as opposed to what's going on right now with everybody being killed. Yeah, he will accept that.
He will accept
I've asked him that question.
You talked to him?
I've asked him that question.
Is France going to lift the block on the
Because he's not, look, if we do this deal, he's not looking for more war. He doesn't mind. But I've specifically asked him that question. He has no problem with it.
At the same press conference, French President Emmanuel Macron interjected to correct Donald Trump regarding the topic of loans. Now, Trump had claimed that all European assistance was provided as loans, with frozen Russian assets serving as collateral.
I mean, this war costed all of us a lot of money. And this is the responsibility of Russia, because the aggressor is Russia.
Should the US be compensated?
So at the end of the day, this frozen asset should be part of the negotiation. All in all.
Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money. To be clear,
Yeah.
we have 230 billion frozen assets in Europe, Russian assets, but this is not as a collateral of a loan because this is not our belonging. So they are frozen. If at the end of the day, in the negotiation we will have with Russia, they're ready to give it to us, super. It will be loaned at the end of the day, and Russia will have paid for that.
If you
This is my
believe
wish.
that,
Donald Trump said he will soon meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to sign a deal involving Ukraine giving mineral rights to the United States as compensation for Washington's wartime aid. Now, President Trump said that Zelenskyy may come to Washington, D.C. this week or the next to sign the agreement and claimed it will bring economic benefits to both countries. Now, the U.S. president went on to say that he's also interested in discussing mineral deals with Russia once the war is over. Monday evening, the president of the European Council, Antonio Costa, called a meeting of EU leaders for March 6. While visiting Kyiv, Costa underscored that the EU has been the largest donor of aid to Ukraine. He also added that the EU provides support for Ukraine without seeking any of Ukraine's natural resources in return.
Ukraine is a sovereign country, then has the sovereign right to manage its territory, and to negotiate at the international level. I just can say that we, during over these last 3 years, the European Union was the large donor to support Ukraine, and we do this for Ukraine, for Ukrainians, and also for European security, and we are not reclaiming nothing about natural resources in Ukraine.
Now, as Costa is consulting EU leaders ahead of an extraordinary council meeting on Europe's defense and support for Ukraine, which will take place in March, Costa is set to meet the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk here in Warsaw on Tuesday. Now, Costa is traveling to Poland this following his visit to Ukraine. Talks between the Polish Prime Minister and the European Council are going to revolve around further support for Kyiv in the war with Russia and also in the context of potential peace talks. Latvian President Edgars Rinkēvičs will also be visiting Poland. The meeting is expected to focus on Ukraine, as well as Poland and Latvia are among Kyiv's staunchest supporters. Rinkēvičs is also on his way back from Ukraine, where he and other leaders commemorated the 3rd anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. On Monday, Ukrainians commemorated the 3rd anniversary of the full-scale Russian invasion on their country. Our correspondent, Donald Arleth, was in Irpin, where some of the worst atrocities against Ukrainian civilians took place. Here's his report straight from the site of the tragedy.
It's been 3 years since Russia launched its unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine, and I'm standing in a very symbolic place at the Ramani Bridge near Irpin, which was the site of the evacuation of the civilian population by the thousands fleeing oncoming Russian soldiers and an active war zone. Now, this bridge was the only link from the city to Kyiv, and the armed forces of Ukraine blew it up as the Russians advanced closer and closer to Kyiv. Now, the civilian population was stuck in Irpin, where they were trying to escape the heavy fighting. And of course, we saw images 3 years ago of thousands of people crossing right across this bridge, getting to the safety of the other side of the river. Now, the worst atrocities took place in Bucha. In the Bucha region, 1,700 civilians were killed, and in Bucha itself, 700 were murdered by Russian troops who occupied the town for 33 days. Today, there were commemorations across Irpin, the Road of Life, what is known as the Road of Life, how people were able to escape the oncoming Russian troops and even occupied areas, and of course in Bucha itself, the site of mass graves that were exhumed in April after the city was liberated. Now, this was one of the first, we saw the first images coming from this region showing the brutality of Russian troops and how they indiscriminately killed, raped, and plundered the civilian population that had no time to escape the oncoming Russian advance. The commemorations today were somber, although small. In the time since this tragic incident 3 years ago, of course, many people have had to go fight the war. Many of the men have been enlisted. Many of the men have wanted to go. Well, we talked the other night with an air defense group. Of course, these people were either under occupation or due to the atrocities of Bucha, they decided that they wanted to volunteer for the defense forces to keep civilians safe from Russian terror attacks in the skies.
We experienced such terror in Bucha. When I was fleeing from Bucha, Valentina was escaping from Nemishave. These cities were under occupation. We saw with our own eyes what the Russian occupiers were doing on our land, to our people. I was also under the occupation with my family. We had a hard time leaving as well. We knew what was happening and what atrocities the Russians were committing. We managed to leave, but when we returned, we felt the urge to be useful in defending our country. In the beginning, we were weaving camouflage nets. We were helping in different ways. And then, when the training for shooting down Shahed drones started, we didn't hesitate. We joined immediately.
Now, it's been 3 years since the full-scale Russian invasion, but I'd like to remind you it's been 14 years of Ukraine's struggle with an ever more imperialist Russia trying to take the country back by force. Reporting from Irpin, Don Arleth, TVP World.
My absolute priority will be to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible so that step by step we can really achieve independence from the USA. These are the words of Germany's soon-to-be new Chancellor Friedrich Merz after his party, the CDU, secured a major victory in Sunday's federal elections. Our correspondent Sasha Farbach was in Berlin and has this report.
Now, as the dust settles, the Germans have voted. Now, the voter turnout has been one of the historic highs, looking at almost 84%, one of the highest since reunification. Now, some of the results are in. The Conservatives under Friedrich Merz have pulled out. They're in the driving seat. Now, it will come to him as being the new chancellor. Who they will make a coalition with, we'll have to wait and see. Now, already he wants to get to work quickly, potentially with a coalition with the SPD, former Chancellor Scholz. He's already been in touch with different leaders. He's received congratulations from across the board, from allies like France, from also other countries like the UK. So he knows that the pressure is on. Now, there's a whole range of issues that Germany must deal with. Any chancellor must get to work quickly. Now, experts that we spoke to here have told us a little bit more why it matters.
There's going to be a change. There's going to be a transition of leadership in the SPD, and what that means in terms of both, by the way, defense, but also in terms of immigration, and we'll have a role there. My sense is that the immediacy of the problem was clear, and that is also an indication about the strength of the AfD. So they got to do something, and I think that Merz, as you well know, tried to do something before the election on this issue. So he's going to have to find some common ground with the SPD on that. It's inevitable, and you can't ignore it.
This will also be a significant time for Germany and Europe, as now everyone is looking very much to Berlin to potentially lead that way on a host of issues, if that's standing up to Trump or if that's also with dealing with an aggressive Russia and concluding potentially that war in Ukraine. Much at stake. Sasha Farbach from Berlin for TVP World.
And that's all for this edition of World News here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching.